Pelican Bay is California's pressure cooker, 23 hours a day in isolation, designed to contain the most dangerous names. Yet even behind those concrete walls, orders still find a way to travel. The prison sits at the far northern edge of California, near the Oregon border, completely cut off from any town. Inside the SHU, each inmate is confined to a cell barely larger than a single bed, with no windows and no social contact. The system believed that distance, silence, and strict control would break every line of command. But some men do not need to stand in front of others to wield power. Their names alone are enough to make people obey. Rene "Boxer" Enriquez was one of them. Enriquez didn't come from wealth. He grew up around Cerritos and Artesia, where gangs were not a choice but part of the environment. At a young age, he proved he was willing to do ruthless things to earn respect. In the late 1980s, he became involved in 2 homicides, including one where, according to court records, the victim was shot at close range. Those acts, by the rules of the underworld, were his ticket up the ladder of power. He climbed quickly and was recognized as a carnal, the highest rank within La Ime, the Mexican Mafia. From then on, he was no longer the one carrying out attacks. He was the one giving orders. To understand that power, you have to understand how La Ime works. The Mexican Mafia isn't just a street gang. It operates like a structured criminal organization, with young soldiers on the front lines, mid-level enforcers, and reps, or representatives, who collect money from activities such as drug sales, gambling, and extortion. Everyone must pay a percentage based on total earnings, not profit. If you sell, you pay. Who sells, who collects, who is allowed to operate, all of it must go through La Ime. And if anyone refuses, delays, or challenges that system, one short command is issued: green light. That's all it takes for someone to know their life may end in any cell or alleyway. During a period when street violence in Los Angeles was spiraling, La Ime reached a realization: random violence doesn't make money. Daily drive-bys only brought heavy police presence into Latino neighborhoods. And when the police moved in, the flow of money stopped. So from behind bars, a decision was made: stop the drive-bys. It wasn't mercy. It was business. Fewer gunshots meant less attention. Less attention meant smoother operations. And smoother operations meant steady tax payments. The steadier the taxes, the stronger La Ime's influence became. Boxer helped enforce that new order on the streets. When Boxer was sentenced to life and transferred to Pelican Bay, many thought it was over. Cut off from the Sureños, trapped in extreme isolation, his calls and letters monitored, it seemed like the ultimate defeat for a man who once managed an empire. But isolation only made his legend grow. A carnal sent to the harshest prison for being too powerful became a symbol among younger members. They admired him not because he was free, but because he remained a threat, even while locked away. While most prisoners broke under isolation, Enriquez adapted. He used small, secret messages known as kites to send instructions. In letters and phone calls, ordinary words hid coded meanings. A strange mention of someone's name could be a demand for payment. A phrase about bad air could mean it was time to remove a rival. Visitors sometimes carried those orders out of the prison, unknowingly becoming messengers for operations outside. The prison wasn't a barrier. It was a waiting room, while the network outside kept moving. What authorities didn't anticipate was that everyone knew Boxer was enduring the worst conditions imaginable. That suffering gave his orders weight. A man willing to face Pelican Bay without breaking would not hesitate to authorize violence. The message was clear. If Boxer said you must act, you acted. If not, you'd better worry about surviving until morning. The system once believed prisons would reform or dismantle gangs. But for La Ime, prisons became their training grounds for leadership. When a carnal like Boxer was locked up, he wasn't seen as defeated. He was placed exactly where the organization needed him, at the command center, deep inside the system that was supposed to contain him. To reach him, law enforcement had to enter the prison itself, where La Ime's invisible control was as strong as ever. The most disturbing part of this story isn't the violence Enriquez committed before his arrest. It's the violence he could still create after being locked in isolation. A system designed to punish was, unintentionally, validating his power. Pelican Bay confined Enriquez's body, but the name Boxer continued to move freely through tax collections, internal purges, and the fear that lingered on the streets. That set the stage for what came next, when a La M.A. leader began to talk, and his words exposed the organization's deepest secrets from inside Pelican Bay itself. That was when the gang's true nightmare began. In California's Mexican gang world, some attacks aren't meant to kill. They're meant to send a message. And sometimes that message is delivered in the one place thought to be safe: the attorney's room. In 1991, Rene "Boxer" Enriquez was being held at Los Angeles County Jail. A lower-ranking La M.A. member, Salvador Mon Buenrostro, was brought to the attorney's room for legal work. No one expected that moment to mark a turning point in Enriquez's path. But in La M.A., safety is an illusion. The attorney's room, a place with limited cameras and restricted guard access, became a deadly blind spot. Buenrostro sat down, flipped through some papers thinking it was just another day. But for Enriquez and others, it was the perfect setting for internal discipline. According to court records, within seconds, Enriquez and an accomplice attacked with improvised weapons. Around 26 strikes were delivered in that confined space. How many panicked? How many staff members rushed in? Those details vary, but one fact remains. It wasn't an impulsive act. It was a calculated decision. Why the attorney's room? Because it sent a clear message. Even in the safest place, we can still reach you. And even more chilling, better to act under cameras than let a suspected traitor live. In La M.A., suspicion alone could justify an order. With 26 strikes in broad daylight, surrounded by lawyers and jail staff, the organization showed it had no fear of being seen. Buenrostro survived and later became a key piece in law enforcement's understanding of the Mexican Mafia. For Enriquez, the incident pushed him higher up the chain, a carnal proven willing to act decisively for the organization. But for the FBI, it was a warning. La M.A. was operating inside the very system meant to control them. After the attack, Enriquez was transferred to Pelican Bay's SHU, the highest level of isolation. Yet instead of losing influence, he gained even more authority. Pelican Bay was supposed to silence him. Instead, it amplified his voice. Everyone knew he was serving a life sentence and still capable of ordering violence. The prison locked away his body, but the name Boxer traveled even farther across Los Angeles. No longer able to act directly, Enriquez began using every channel of communication the prison couldn't fully control. In his letters, he wrote short stories, or family greetings that seemed harmless at first glance. But every name, every nickname, every date, and every casual phrase carried meaning only his organization could decode. Each one could signal a debt collection, a drug territory shift, or even a green light order for someone who had become a problem. On monitored phone calls, he and his contacts spoke in metaphors, referring to a house that needs fixing when someone had to be dealt with, or leftover inventory when drugs hadn't yet been sold. Every line carried an instruction. Every call was a field report. Controlling information meant controlling power, and Enriquez understood that better than most. Visitors were even more effective. A short conversation lasting only a few minutes could contain a list of dozens of names. When they walked out, their hands were empty, but their minds carried the most dangerous orders. From a visiting room in far northern California, those instructions traveled through the prison, across cities, and reached exactly where they were meant to go. What truly worried investigators was that Pelican Bay hadn't weakened La M.A.'s command. It had made it more mysterious, harder to track, and, in some ways, even stronger. Orders that came from a carnal in isolation carried a different kind of authority. Within that structure, Enriquez guided the organization's adaptation. La M.A. began operating like a disciplined criminal enterprise, minimizing random violence to maximize profit. Young soldiers learned a simple rule. When guns go off, police move in. When the streets stay quiet, La M.A. earns more. That peace was really control through money and fear. But every system of power has its cracks. For La M.A., the weakness wasn't in how they hid information, but in the people who held it. If a carnal could send messages out, a carnal could also send messages back. This time, to the authorities. By 2003 and 2004, Boxer's mindset began to shift. Not out of guilt, there was no sign of that, but out of clarity. He saw his future. A colonel commanding from the SHU could be feared, respected, even legendary. But he had no way out. Once he lost his value, the organization would replace him like a worn-out gear. Enriquez had seen it before. Powerful men erased by their own brothers once they became liabilities. Meanwhile, FBI investigations were tightening. With new technology, the prison began tracking letters and recording calls in greater detail. Bits of intelligence about tax collection, territory control, or internal orders slowly came together into a full picture. At its center, the name Boxer Enriquez appeared over and over again. That was when he made his move, one that nobody thought possible for a colonel who once carried out a 26-strike attack in broad daylight. But Enriquez understood something others didn't. The information he held could buy him freedom, or at least a different kind of treatment. He began to talk with federal investigators, not small talk, but detailed explanations of organizational strategy. Enriquez described exactly how La Eme collected its tax, the true reason behind the drive-by ceasefire, how social assets were distributed among the carnales, how green lights were authorized, how new members were recruited inside prison, and how suspicions of betrayal were handled. From the very first interviews, agents realized they were hearing from a man who once sat at the leadership table, not a low-level informant. His knowledge was unprecedented. It allowed law enforcement to finally decode La Eme's internal language, a code they had only guessed at for years. In one recorded session, Enriquez described Pelican Bay not as a place that weakened inmates, but as one that sharpened their power. In his world, the harsher the confinement, the greater the respect. That insight made his information invaluable. Authorities came to understand that to fight La Eme inside prison, they needed to use La Eme's own knowledge. Enriquez became the centerpiece of that transformation. He attended police training sessions, explaining street terminology, revealing gang tactics, and detailing how attorney rooms had once been the system's blind spots. When Boxer stood before law enforcement officers, teaching them how to dismantle a structure he once protected, it was a paradox. A man who once enforced death orders now lecturing on how to stop others like him. Not everyone could accept it. Inside La Eme, he was branded the ultimate traitor, a death sentence that would hang over him forever. Outside, some saw him as a vital source, others viewed him as a manipulator trading knowledge for privilege. But regardless of how he was judged, Enriquez had done something no one else had. He pulled back the curtain on La Eme's secrets. From the inside, from within Pelican Bay, and the consequences of that would soon unfold. Yet Boxer's turnaround was not welcomed with applause or open arms from the authorities. They recognized his value, but they also knew that trusting a colonel who once ordered daylight attacks was no easy thing. Every debriefing came with doubt. Was he telling everything? Was he hiding parts to protect his allies? Or was this just another survival tactic? For La Eme, his cooperation with the FBI was an automatic death warrant. In their world, betrayal wasn't punished, it was erased. Boxer knew that once he started talking, even a small mistake, a single green light or a young recruit eager to prove himself could end his life in minutes, no matter how many guards or cameras were around him. Every time he left an interview room, he stepped back into a reality where nowhere was truly safe. Locked doors, armed escorts, constant surveillance, none of it mattered. To La Eme, cameras couldn't stop blades and distance couldn't stop loyalty. In a later training document, one officer said, "We didn't just learn how to catch criminals. We learned how to understand La Eme's logic." And Boxer was the one who made that understanding possible. He showed law enforcement that to break the organization's power, they couldn't just target the gunmen on the streets. They had to look at the men in the SHU, the ones writing coded letters and speaking in metaphors over the phone. His lessons reached far beyond street officers. Federal agents, prison administrators, and even financial investigators began updating their approach. For the first time, they could see the full map of the Mexican Mafia, who controlled which regions, which prisons, where the money flowed, and which unwritten rules outweighed the law itself. What once was guesswork now came from the highest level of authority. For the FBI, Enriquez became a living archive, a man who could translate messages that once made no sense. A taped conversation about the weather could mean an order to remove an obstacle. A birthday card could hide a tax list. The deeper they dug, the clearer it became. This organization wasn't running the streets from the outside in. It was running them from the inside out. At the same time, Enriquez had to accept the psychological cost of his choices. He no longer had a home in the world he once ruled. If he stayed in the SHU, La Aimee would wait for a chance to take him out. If he was moved to another facility, there would still be Sureños in the yard. And if he ever walked free, his so-called new life would mean living in hiding for the rest of his days. In the eyes of the organization, he was already dead. But to the state, he could never be just another man. That was the tragedy of boxer Enriquez. The man who once controlled fear now had to live inside it. And the more he spoke, the clearer he understood one truth. What he revealed could help dismantle parts of La Aime's structure, but the system that created La Aime was still there. No matter how many secrets were exposed or how many members were taken down, new generations would rise, because the conditions that allowed it to exist had never changed. His cooperation didn't make the world cleaner, Chai. It only forced the secrets that lived in darkness to step into the light. And whenever light appears, darkness retreats, but only to hide deeper. Some criminal organizations are destroyed because law enforcement does its job well. Others survive so long that every strike against them is like cutting grass. It grows back in days. The Mexican Mafia, La Aimee, belongs to the second kind. The story of Rene boxer Enriquez proves one thing. If you want to fight a monster, you have to understand that it doesn't survive by claws alone. It survives because of the ecosystem that feeds it. After Enriquez began cooperating with authorities, a domino effect followed. Investigations once at a standstill found new life. Law enforcement no longer just knew who gave the orders, they began to understand why those orders existed, what happened when they were disobeyed, and how the money moved behind them. For the first time in years, authorities weren't just going after the street soldiers. They were striking the nervous system of La Aimee. Agents were retrained to read inmate mail like cryptographers. A family letter could be a command to shift supply routes. A list of names that looked like a birthday invitation could actually be a map of new drug territories. Every time one such letter slipped through inspection, someone on the outside had to pay tax, move their operation, or disappear. Thanks to Enriquez's insight, prisons and police began closing off the secret corridors La Aimee had used for years. Attorney meetings were monitored more closely. Calls were analyzed with semantic recognition software to detect hidden codes. Law enforcement started infiltrating what was once thought untouchable, the underground economy inside the prisons. Those efforts led to some of the largest counterattacks ever launched against La Aimee. The FBI no longer targeted only the famous carnales, but also traced the money itself, from small street sales to weekly tax collections. Between 2004 and 2010, coordinated arrests swept through Los Angeles, San Diego, Riverside, and Orange County. Financial reports were decoded. Money laundering operations hidden behind auto shops, phone stores, even small neighborhood churches were exposed. With each layer peeled back, new names appeared, new connections, new local representatives, new lines of command. One agent said, La Aimee is like Hydra, cut off one head, and two more grow back. Law enforcement realized that breaking down small street crews wasn't enough. The empire would survive. So prosecutors turned to the RICO Act, a law against organized crime that allowed them to convict not just those who committed the crimes, but those who ordered them. That was what the Mexican Mafia feared most, a world where there was no longer any place to hide in the dark. But as authorities celebrated their victories, another change was quietly taking shape. The gang was becoming smarter, harder to touch. They started recruiting younger members who were more educated, skilled with encryption and technology. They moved from handwritten notes to coded messages hidden in online games, from prison phones to apps that erased conversations through outside contacts. If once a colonel's testimony was the key to unlocking cases, now it became a double-edged sword. If that testimony failed to convince a jury, the organization's reputation only grew stronger. In many witness protection programs, former La Aimee members couldn't handle being cut off from their roots. Some chose to return to the shadows and disappeared soon after, the final consequence of betrayal. The system kept running, quieter but not weaker. Every victory had its limit. Enriquez wasn't just the key that helped law enforcement understand the Mexican Mafia, he was also the man who destroyed his own standing within it. From a name once feared, he became a target that every young soldier wanted to eliminate to prove his worth. Each day, he stayed alive was another day death waited patiently for a mistake on Rousseau. Authorities had to move him constantly between facilities, change his routines, and restrict who could access his information. A man who once communicated with an entire network now had to cut himself off from everyone to survive. For years, his name was erased from public inmate records, because if La M ever learned where he was, they would act. The traitor was alive, but living like a fugitive. To the public, Enriquez looked like a traitor, a fallen boss trying to stay alive by selling his past. To law enforcement, he was a living database, a map of gang warfare. Each time he spoke, a piece of fog lifted. Each time he revealed something, a secret of La M came into view. But with every word he shared, the noose around his own neck grew tighter. Many agents would later say, "No one understands La M the way Boxer does." That sentence was both a compliment and a warning. Because if anyone was smart enough to play both sides, it was him. So despite his immense contributions, trust was never absolute. Authorities kept him in a delicate balance, part asset, part threat, like holding a razor blade. Let it go, it cuts you. Hold it too tight, it still cuts you. Yet Enriquez's cooperation produced one unexpected result. La M changed the way it communicated. No more easily monitored calls, no more clear letters. They switched to flexible codes and human couriers instead of phones. They understood that to survive, they had to evolve faster than the government could adapt. One correctional officer admitted, "We can isolate a person, but we can never isolate an idea." Across neighborhoods in Southern California, even as many carnals fell, the 3-dot tattoo kept appearing on young arms. Kids growing up with few choices faced the same decision: work endlessly for little and stay poor, or join the gang for a sense of power, knowing the cost was blood. That was when the gang stopped being just a criminal network. It became a culture of survival. In many Latino neighborhoods, when police show up only to punish and never to protect, trust in the law drops to nearly zero. People understand that calling 911 doesn't always save them, but a local La M representative can solve their problem within hours. The price? That's for the organization to decide. A 14-year-old selling marijuana in the park might earn more in a week than his parents do in a month of hard labor. Even knowing the road leads to prison, they still take it, because the present matters more than the future. And La M always has a role waiting for kids like that. In one interrogation, Boxer once said, "We didn't create violence. We just learned how to use it where it already existed." In places where a person's value is measured by their ability to survive, gangs become the only language of power. So every time a gang is taken down, people forget to ask the most important question: who will fill the power vacuum left behind? Today, law enforcement reports show that La M's power has declined in some areas, but in others, it has become more refined, more invisible. They no longer need to show off, and they no longer need guns in the streets. Just one phone call, one look, one message. Pelican Bay, the place meant to cage power, still functions as a command center. The difference is, the orders are now far more subtle. Boxer helped authorities understand that, but understanding was never enough. To break the cycle, you have to change what makes people willing to trade everything for a taste of power. Enriquez saw it clearly. He could help arrest a few men, dismantle a few networks, stop a few attacks, but the roots of La M lie in despair. And despair is cheap to find, easy to feed, and almost impossible to kill. In poor Latino communities, there are too few good schools, too few legitimate jobs, too little faith in justice. Where the law doesn't show up, the gang does, and says, "We'll protect you." The cost of that protection is youth, freedom, and sometimes life itself. Today, Enriquez is still alive, somewhere under government protection. He continues to lecture police groups trying to bring knowledge from the shadows into the light. But he knows that light will never be strong enough to burn away the darkness that once sheltered him. The authorities know it too. If anyone is smart enough to play both sides, it's the man who once commanded within La M. So, Enriquez remains in a state of both asset and risk, a sharpened blade that's dangerous to grip too tightly, and just as dangerous to let go. Maybe that's the only form of justice that exists in this world. To leave the shadows, your shadow must go first and announce who you are. Somewhere in the isolation cells of California today, another man is learning to stay silent and wait. A new Boxer is being built, A new empire is preparing to rise, because power never leaves a throne empty. Boxer stepped out of the game of power, but the game itself never ended. Catching one boxer doesn't mean you've caught the system that created him. You've only taken its map. And the system? It's still there, patient, evolving, and quiet. And if we don't change the conditions that created Rene "Boxer" Enriquez, who will be the next man to rule an empire of crime from behind a steel door?